You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
Come with us if you dare into a twilight world of unspeakable horror.
You must die. Everybody must die.
Sample, if you dare, the deadly passion of the vampire lovers. The vampire lovers. Perverted creatures of the night find their victims everywhere. The unsuspecting merrymakers in glittering ballrooms with their young and tender throats. The sleeping beauties whose troubled dreams turn into real, terrifying nightmares.
It was a cat! A huge cat!
For God's sake, save her!
So welcome back to Girls, Guts, and Giallo. I'm Annie Rose Malamet, and I'm really excited because today I am joined by another lesbian vampire. So I'm talking today, of course, to Miss Malice. So Miss Malice, you're the first other lesbian vampire I've had on this podcast. It's super exciting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and today we're talking, of course, about one of my top 3 lesbian vampire film favorites, The Vampire Lovers from 1970. And I've done my 2 other top 3 films already on the podcast. So I've done The Hunger and I've done Daughters of Darkness. And we're rounding out the trilogy of my favorites today. So there's so much to say because I feel like I've been studying this film for so long. But before we get into that, Miss Malice, who are you? What do you do? What are you about?
I'm a high femme les drag performer in Brooklyn. I'm a femc and, of course, a lesbian vampire enthusiast. And I'm part of this drag and burlesque collective called Switch and Play. And I also perform as a cast member in Sasha Velour's Nightgowns production. And for the past 4 years with Switch and Play, I've been involved in producing this show called Vamp, which is just a celebration of it's a celebration of all things queer, decadent, and bloodthirsty. And that's a show I'm really proud of. Amazing. So, of course, I'm very happy to talk about lesbian vampires always. And to get to talk to you about this film in particular today is very exciting. I'm a longtime lurker, admirer of your work and of the podcast. And I also love the other 2 films that you've mentioned, The Hunger and Daughters of Darkness. So very excited to round out the trilogy together.
Yes, it's so exciting. I mean, it's just, I know we have like such internet crushes on each other, always lurking. And you just sipped something out of like a blood red chalice.
Yes, I'm trying to dress on theme. This is my like Carmilla nightgown. It's very reminiscent of the black gowns that Ingrid Pitt wears. And I'm drinking a little beverage out of a red chalice.
Amazing. Amazing. So, The Vampire Lovers, when did you first see it and what did you love about it? Because I know that this is also one of your favorites and I know you recently screened this one, right?
I did. I recently screened it at NYU. I got to do like a cute little talk about it and do sort of midnight movie style commentary because of a friend's kind of getting me that gig in the cinema studies program there as one of their programming evenings. So that was really fun. I was trying to remember the first time that I saw this film because I thought that you might ask me that since I'm familiar with the podcast. And I think it was probably about 10 or 12 years ago. I think I saw it right after college. Wish I had seen it much earlier than that. But early in grad school, I was a Victorianist, and that's when I was first introduced to Le Fanu's Carmilla. And once I read the novella and was completely obsessed, I realized that there were all these film adaptations. I'd always been into like spooky things and vampires, but had somehow not been introduced to this world until that moment. And so I just went on a mission to watch every film that I could find of this genre. And I think that this was like the third one that I saw. So I think my very first was Roger Vadim's Blood and Roses, which I also love. Yeah. And then I think I saw Jean Rollin Shiver of the Vampire. And then I think this was number 3. And it just made such a huge impression on me. For me, I think like, what do I remember most about reacting to? Like, it's Ingrid Pitt, you know, Ingrid Pitt is just everything. She is the archetype. She is the ultimate image of like the lesbian vampire, to me, especially like from this particular period. And so I think I just became really obsessed with Ingrid Pitt.
I mean, what is not to be obsessed with? Like, yeah, just rewatching this. And I saw this film, I want to say, like 6 years ago. So I just remember, like, I hadn't seen it before, surprisingly. And I think it's one of my favorite Carmilla adaptations. It's completely not true to the novella at all, but the production is so beautiful and the women in it are so beautiful and their scenes together are just so good and sexy, and it's just like a femme for femme dream. Like, it's a total femme for femme fantasy, and it has like the really lush, beautiful Hammer production, but so much sexier than anything that Hammer had done before this moment. It's just got so many beautiful nightgowns that I covet. So many good nightgowns. Yeah. And Ingrid Pitt's eyeliner is so on point. Oh my God. Everybody's makeup is so good. And I know that you've also recreated some of the press release photos, which if you guys haven't seen the press release photos for the Vampire Lovers, they're so iconic. It's just like Ingrid Pitt in this like sheer white nightgown with like all of her victims surrounding her, and it's just one of my favorite photos ever. The promotional images are equally as important to the film itself, just like as an aesthetic object that really speaks to me. I think the promotional images are a reason why the film is my favorite, even though they're so misleading. They really like what the film is actually going to be like. And the trailer, and like, I know if you've heard like the radio spot that they did about the film too, when they were promoting it, they really did promote it like you were going to encounter this coven of deadly blood nymphs, that they're going to really be working together. And you're going to like encounter all of these women in full force. And of course, that's not quite what the film is like at all. Disappointingly, I would love to see the version that the promotional images promise. But those images are just so incredible. They're just like draped over coffins, and they've got that like dreamy 70s like edit to them in terms of the lighting. Very pastel. Yeah, they're so good. And like it's kind of almost as if they're playing on Jean Rollin, like, who does that in his films. So they're kind of like, it's like the British version of that, where it's just like not quite as racy because Jean Rollin is a French director. So those are
who was making lots of porn.
Yeah, who was like making literal porn. Or like Jess Franco, who did Vampiros Lesbos, who was also making like pretty much literal porn.
And the female vampire.
Right, and the female vampire, right. So those films like are definitely more titillating, more sexually exciting than this one. But the Ingrid Pitt is in this one. So it's just, I'm going to gush so much over her when we talk about this film because it's like, I mean, she is the film. So The Vampire right. The Vampire Lovers from 1970. It's a British Gothic horror film. It's a Hammer production. So Hammer Films, do you want to say a little bit about Hammer Films and their background?
Oh gosh. I mean, I guess I could.
I have some notes here also.
Yeah, you know more than me about that.
So
Hammer, but
Hammer Films, it's a British film production company based in London. It was founded in 1934. It's best known for its series of Gothic horror films made between the mid-50s and until the 1970s. So many of these, it was kind of inspired by like the Universal monster movie series. They have classic horror characters such as Frankenstein, Count Dracula, and the Mummy. So Hammer reintroduced these characters to audiences by filming them in vivid color for the first time. So that's what Hammer is really known for. They kind of fizzled out in the 1970s, like right after this film came out, like about 1974. So this is one of their last great horror films, and it's part of their so they started in 1934 and then they had kind of a revival in the 50s, and it's part of their last films in their classic revival period. And it's because Gothic horror films became just kind of unpopular. Like there just wasn't a big market for them anymore, unfortunately.
And they had done so many Dracula movies. Aren't there like 7 or 8?
There's
Dracula
so many
films?
Yeah,
I think there are 7. I haven't seen all of them because they're less interesting to me than the Carmilla Karnstein trilogy for obvious reasons, but I've seen a few of them, obviously, since they're so iconic and famous. And so I think they had like really just like run out of Dracula material. Like Christopher Lee was so over it.
Christopher Lee was done. Like he was famous. So Christopher Lee played Dracula a lot in the Hammer films, and he was famously just kind of fucking done doing that. So that's the other part of it. This film was directed by Roy Ward Baker. It's starring Ingrid Pitt, who plays Carmilla / Marcilla / Mirgala, and Peter Cushing, another Hammer regular, George Cole, Kate O'Mara, Madeline Smith, Dawn Adams, and John Finch. So The Vampire Lovers is based on the Sheridan Le Fanu novel Carmilla, or it's the novella Carmilla. So I wanted to talk about Carmilla a bit briefly. What is the plot of the novella Carmilla?
Oh, me?
Yes.
So the novella it's sort of positioned as this like found document in a sense, which is something I really love about it. It's framed as this case study. It's sort of ambiguous, like who's reading it and who's encountering it. We have sort of someone introducing it by way of also introducing Dr. Heselius's introduction to it. So we already have this sort of layered effect that is common to Gothic narratives. And then once we get past that, we are plunged into this first person account from the point of view of the victim, Laura, as she details her experiences with Carmilla, the lesbian vampire, who finds a way to insinuate herself into her household as a guest, with a sort of like clever ploy of a carriage accident, which is something that I actually love how the film Vampire Lovers takes that up.
Right.
And I mean, even before that happens, we have the sense that Laura has a strong connection to Carmilla because she's sort of haunted by dreams early in her youth of like a cat that's stalking her, and she sees a beautiful woman hovering over her bed, and she feels a piercing in her breast, right? And then when she finally meets Carmilla as this strange guest who gets invited in many years later, she instantly recognizes this is the beautiful woman from my dreams. And what I love in the novel, it's so funny too, is Carmilla's like, yeah, totally. I recognize you too. You were in my dream. Isn't that so weird?
Isn't that weird? Yeah.
One of my favorite parts. But yeah, so we sort of get Laura's firsthand account as she details her intense feelings of both attraction and repulsion to the beautiful Carmilla, who is dark-haired and languid and loves chocolate and sleeping in, which are highly relatable.
Yeah, same.
And tastes. And there are just so many incredible scenes with, Carmilla they're just like brushing each other's hair and like heavy breathing and lusting, and I don't know, it's just I just love the novel.
It's so good. And the thing about the novel, so it's published in 1897, so it predates Dracula by 26 years.
It's 1872.
1872. Oh, that's right. Yeah, so Carmilla is 1872. Dracula. I've got my dyscalculia switching things. Yeah, so it's 1872, and so it predates Dracula by 26 years, right? And it's very, kind of the traditional Gothic novel, like you were saying, and it's, which a lot of Gothic novels explore themes of repressed sexuality, and this one really explores lesbianism, the repressed lesbianism from Sheridan Le Fanu, was an Irish author. And it's definitely infused with a lot of gay panic, which is very typical of, anything from this era that has to do with homosexuality. Yeah. So in a way, it's quite, quote unquote homophobic, even though they would not have that concept then, but has been reappropriated over and over and over again as this very sexy story. And go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah. And I was just going to say, at the same time, I think, there are just so many ways to enjoy it. It feels open-ended. It feels like there are so many ways in which it doesn't feel as conservative as it could have felt.
Oh, absolutely. And, when modern readers, when I've had people read it and they report back to me and they're like, there's just not enough lesbianism. And I'm like, you guys have to understand that at the time, this was extremely scandalous. These women heavy breathing and even approaching talking about being attracted to each other, that was a big deal. And did you see the most recent adaptation of Carmilla that came out in October?
Is that the one that is out of the YouTube series?
No. So there's also a YouTube series, but there's also, I saw it at the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival, and it's directed by Emily Harris, and it's the truest adaptation of Carmilla I've ever seen. So it's really beautiful. Yeah. So if you can find that, definitely Or maybe, I'll cut this out, but maybe I can send you the screener.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, I really liked it. It's a lot slower. It's like not as, it's not supposed to be exploitation or titillating or anything. It's very much more of a introspective kind of story. But and this film, The Vampire Lovers, is one of the many adaptations of Carmilla that happened during the glut of lesbian vampire films that really happens. I mean, it starts with Dracula's Daughter, but then happens more like starting in 1960 with Blood and Roses, which is also a Carmilla adaptation. And then, we just kind of get this story regurgitated and retold over and over again in these films. So Carmilla and also Countess Elizabeth Bathory are very common lesbian vampire characters in this cycle. Yeah.
And worth noting, of course, Ingrid Pitt as the Countess Elizabeth Bathory in Blood Countess.
Yes, which is another film that I love. So Ingrid Pitt plays a quote-unquote lesbian vampire again in Blood Countess. So that's another really beautiful Gothic Hammer film. So
I love that film.
It's really good. Yeah. Not to be confused with Countess Dracula.
Right. Totally. Oh, wait, no, maybe I was thinking of Countess Dracula.
Is it I mean, there's like, these films have like the same names over and over
again. They also
again.
like often release these films under like 10 different names.
Yes.
Especially like the Jean Rollin films are like,
it might be Countess Dracula. I don't know.
I think it is Countess Dracula.
Okay, yeah. So, Dracula. Countess Dracula, Blood Countess, like Rites of the Blood Countess, like these films, they use the same names over and over again. And I won't pretend I don't love that because it's very funny.
Yes.
So this film is the first in the Karnstein trilogy, which includes Lust for a Vampire and Twins of Evil, which are also, I love those films, but the lesbianism is much more subtle going forward.
Yes, that is the thing. I also love those films. They are incredibly beautiful. I think that Twins of Evil I prefer to Lust for a Vampire, but it's so, like, they're just not really even worthy of being called part of a Karnstein trilogy. Like, is just, especially I think Lust for a Vampire is so disappointing because they literally set it at an all-girls boarding school.
I know. You're like, come on, guys.
Like, how could they squander the potential there?
Yeah. Like, it's really beautiful. Like, I actually use a lot of the images from Lust for a Vampire when I promote the podcast because I love those images. But yeah, it's not like Vampire Lovers actually has explicit lesbianism, whereas Lust for a Vampire and Twins of Evil, it's much more heavily implied.
Yeah, Twins of Evil, like, really has almost nothing.
Yeah, they have the one part where one of the twins is biting the breast of a victim, and that's kind of the only thing that they have. So, yeah, this was the first one, and it seems like they kind of lost their courage, their chutzpah going forward, because it was daring and a bit scandalous at the time for its explicit lesbian themes, this film.
It was very shocking. I think that, like, it's easy to forget, but those nipples were extremely shocking.
Those nipples, yeah.
And I feel like I remember reading somewhere or hearing somewhere that, like, the censors did flag this as potentially an issue, like the lesbian content and the nudity, and that the Hammer production kind of justified it by saying, oh, okay, it's like true to the novel, which I find so interesting considering, as you referenced before, that so many people involved with this production were so interested in downplaying the lesbian content and acting as though didn't think there was any lesbian content in the original novella. So it's fascinating.
I know. So like Ingrid Pitt and a lot of the other actresses they don't think of this as a lesbian film, or they didn't. Like, Ingrid Pitts claims that she played the role as not a lesbian, but as asexual.
I know, it kills me.
Girl.
Terrifying lesbian vampire that like all men felt so uneasy around. It's just one of the things that's so delicious about this film, and like her husky voice.
Yes.
Just like she's got big lesbian vampire energy.
I mean,
and to hear her disavow that after I had already fallen in love with the film and then tried to dig a little deeper, I was just devastated. Like, girl.
Ingrid, it's just one of those things where it's like straight people will do so many backbends to like pretend that something isn't gay. This is a very gay movie. Like, they straight up kiss in it. What are you talking about? That she's asexual. It's just one of those things where you have to like write it off. You're like, okay, like whatever.
I tried to persuade myself that like she didn't really believe that, and that she was saying that to like try to avoid the film from being like further censored or something. But I don't think that that's true, but that's what I like to tell myself.
I mean, who knows? Like,
she knew that she read the novella, like she read it very closely, and there are all these recordings of her reading it, which are also really beautiful to listen to.
Oh, I haven't heard those. Yeah,
you can find some on YouTube. And there are some on my like special features DVD that I have from like Shout Factory. But so she knew the source material intimately, and it's quite clear in the source material, I believe, as well. And so it's just wild that she did that.
Yeah, and Madeline Smith also said, like, oh, she's like, I'm as far away. I really couldn't be less lesbian than I am. I mean, I am totally disinterested in females. In that way, I really felt it was distasteful. I hated doing that, loathed doing it. Ingrid did too. The Vampire Lovers was very steamy.
That's so funny. I didn't know those quotes. I knew that I've seen like an interview with her like from more recently where she reminisces about the role, and she didn't say that exactly, but she said that she was just so clueless. Like, she was just a true innocent ingenue who like didn't know anything about sex in the world, and that it just didn't ever even occur to her that the film could be gay because she didn't know what a lesbian was. She was so Catholic.
This quote kind of seems like methinks the lady doth protest a little too much. Like, it's, and then,
yeah,
right. Like, okay, we get it. Yeah.
I love how she's like, I love men, or like whatever. Like, I'm not interested.
I love men. I'm not interested in women at all. Okay. Nobody asked.
In the same interview that I watched, she talks about how much she loved doing the Vampire Lovers and how she had only fond memories of the films. But then she's like, you know what? You know what really makes Hammer great? It's the men. The men make it great. And I'm like, how could you watch the Vampire Lovers and say that? I mean, honestly, I guess I have like a biased point of view, and I don't really care that much about men on screen. But
not at all. Yeah.
But it sounds like the exact same thing. Like, it's about the men, I promise.
It's very like no homo. Yeah, like, okay, girl. They're barely in the movie. So
they're barely in the movie, and I love that because, like, to me, that feels true to Carmilla, the novella.
There's barely any men in Carmilla at all. Like, there's the father who's clueless, there's the doctor, and yeah, I mean, let's talk about the plot. Let's get into the Vampire Lovers and talk about how pointless the men are in this.
Yeah, definitely. Let's do it.
So it takes place in 19th century Styria, which is in Austria, right? And it takes place in 1790. And we open with a memoriam. We open with this narration by Joachim von Hartog, who is mourning his sister Isabella von Hartog. And he's talking about how he avenged her death. And he's telling us this story. So we open with, very like misty, gothic, typical Hammer production. Graves, abandoned, ruined castles, and he's telling us this from the ruined castle of the Karnstein family. And he's laying in wait for a vampire to rise from its tomb. This was kind of an interesting mythology, and I wondered what your thoughts about this were. Were like that the vampire wears this shroud, and also that the vampire cannot return to its grave without the shroud.
Yeah, I was going to say the same to you. I'm so curious what your thoughts are about it. I don't believe I've encountered it in any other film.
Me neither.
From what I understand, it's very much like they invented this for the film. And I think some Hammer fans and horror fans felt really frustrated by it because they're like, okay, you just added another totally different rule. Like, where did this come from?
Where did that come from?
It doesn't make very much sense.
I've never heard that.
Especially when he like does that move where he's waving from the castle and he's like, come and get the shroud. Like, I taunted it. And it's like, she's clearly already shrouded.
I don't get it. Yeah, it seems like a plot device that they added to get them to have an encounter or something. Yeah.
I'm not sure why he wouldn't just do like any of the things that you see from the other films, like putting a crucifix in her coffin so that she can't return, or you know what I mean? It's just like interesting.
Right.
To me, I feel like the only thing I can think of is like, it's about the garment, you know, like it is about the garment in this moment. And I love that she is just like completely swathed in this like flowing chiffon-y fabric that appears to be lavender.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's very beautiful. Like the vampire, so we see this vampire like shrouded, but there's also another shroud and she can't return to her grave without it, so he steals it and he follows this shrouded vampire as it like wanders the streets in search of blood, and she kills some drunk guy, and but then she returns to the castle and she can't return to her grave because Hartog has the shroud, and like you were saying, he taunts her with it, so she goes after him inside the castle, and because she's shrouded, we don't actually know what this vampire looks like yet. And she takes off this shroud and it's revealed to be this beautiful blonde woman.
She is so iconic.
Yes.
Like, it's a shame that she has such a short role, but I think that like the images of her as this blonde in the beautiful flowing sheer white gown, which is just like to fucking die for, frankly. It's so iconic.
Yes, and she descends on him, and her bosom, like her big breasts. So the other thing about this is like all the women in this film have ample bosoms, and
oh yes,
they're all exposed constantly. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Actually, not to take it back to Madeline Smith.
Oh, go ahead.
This anecdote where she claims that like a few weeks before production, they called her up and told her that her breasts were inadequate for the film because she was like too like frail and just like didn't have a voluptuous enough bod. So she, as she tells it, she gorged herself on yogurt for 2.5 weeks and miraculously grew those spectacular breasts that we see in the film.
Oh my God.
Which is so wild.
That's so funny.
They are gigantic. Like, they are beautiful and gigantic. And I just, like, do not believe that 2 weeks of yogurt could do that to you. But, like, I don't know. I mean, I love dairy.
I think maybe she got them done. But I mean,
she swears they're natural, but it's
right.
So funny. I just had to tell you that story.
That's really great. I had no idea. But yeah, all the boobs in this movie are incredible.
They're so incredible. We love boobs. We love boobs in this Hammer film.
We love boobs over here. And her bosom like touches this cross around his neck, and she recoils, and he decapitates her. And the decapitation sound effect was achieved by cutting through a cabbage, apparently.
Yes, I have heard that. That's amazing.
And then now we get our classic credits, right? And we're now at this party. Everyone is dancing very gaily. This is where General Spielsdorf's shindig, who's played by Peter Cushing. And we meet these two young girls who are our future victims. It's kind of obvious if you haven't seen the movie, the way they set it up. Laura and Emma. And Laura is General Spielsdorf's niece. And now we finally get to meet this mysterious dark-haired woman, a countess, which I feel like is kind of a nod to Countess Bathory. And she arrives with her daughter Marcella, which, you know, is Carmilla rearranged. We
love the anagram moment.
I love that. Yeah. And it's very common.
Also true to the novel.
Yes, true to the novel. And also is done in Blood and Roses as well. Played by Ingrid Pitt, who, of course, is gorgeous. She wears this fabulous red gown with this matching tiara. A lot of female vampires in film often wear red to sort of show you that they're vampires and they have this lust for blood. She's the only one who wears red. And she just looks incredible. Like, it's just iconic. And
yeah, the red look is so incredibly iconic. And I love this. I just love this first entrance when she comes in with the Countess too. The Countess is passing her off as her daughter, but she pauses and really awkwardly delivers that line, like making it very clear. Like, might I introduce to you my daughter?
Like, they didn't talk about this before.
It's so funny too, because like, I know that like one of the criticisms of this film was that like people felt like Ingrid Pitt was the wrong choice for Carmilla because she didn't like look young. And it's actually why I love it so much.
Me too.
I love that she has like kind of like Dyke Crone energy.
Yes.
She doesn't look young. She does not look youthful. And like, she's so fucking hot. And like, I really just feel like that's an energy that I aspire to as someone who has never exactly been like a fresh faced.
Totally.
person.
I mean,
That's not the brand.
She's mommy. Like,
she is so mommy. I mean, yeah, the mommy stuff is like real heavy in this film for sure.
I mean, and I love that she looks older and the young, innocent victims look young and innocent. Like, it very much works for me. And her makeup also.
I love that too. Her makeup too. But like, this moment makes me laugh so hard because like the Countess like literally looks younger than her.
She does.
Like, this is my daughter. And she's not. The actress, I cannot remember that actress's name, but she's not like younger in terms of being an actress, but they look the same age or of similar ages. So when she introduces her as her daughter, it just makes it all the more like kind of mysterious and implausible and
perverse.
Perverse. And like a major theme of Carmilla is that the men are always really clueless and never have any idea what's going on. So the fact that she's just like, this is my daughter, and General Spielsdorf is like, totally, yes.
He's works. Like, okay. And all of the men are like immediately going gaga for Marcella because she doesn't look like any of the other women there. And she dances with one of the young men, but her eyes are like glued to Laura, General Spielsdorf's niece. And Laura,
this is my favorite.
I love this because Laura is dancing with her like quote unquote boyfriend, her beau, whatever. And she says that Marcella keeps staring at him and she's like, oh, she's trying to take you away from me.
I do think she'd love to take you away from me.
Yeah. Carl. Right. And Carl is like, and she's staring at you. And this is such a common femdyke experience.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I love that moment so much. Like, strong case for Carl as bisexual because Carl is the only one who knows what's going on.
Strong case. Yeah, he clocks it.
He clocks it. And like, I cry laughing every single time at the scene because it's instantaneous. He takes one look at her and he goes, oh, she's looking at you. Like, That's it. And he's just like sees it so clearly. Nobody else sees it, at least at first. And then I love that like all of a sudden we get like sinister music. Like as soon as he says, she's looking at you, it's like chimes.
Yes. And she's checking her out so hardcore, which is, a very common femme dyke moment of like, no, I'm not looking at your boyfriend. I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
Which I love when these films sort of like unintentionally capture very real queer experiences.
Exactly. There are so many of those delicious moments in this film that feel 100% like inside jokes, like community in jokes. And that's why it's so fascinating to like hear Roy Ward Baker like insist that he saw nothing gay about Carmilla the novel and that he wasn't making a gay film, because these moments feel so true and delicious and like campy, and just it's so hard to believe that this wasn't made by us.
I know. It just makes me feel like they're just saying that, like, because it's just so obvious. Like, this is, how many times has that happened to all of us growing up as femmes, like just being completely invisible, except to people who just know.
Yeah.
And
it's so great.
It's so great. And Carl like can also sort of clock her because he sees in her what he sees in him, which is like a look of lust, like looking at somebody with desire. And yeah, I just love that subtle. It's such a short moment, but it's one of the best in the film. And this mysterious man arrives, right? This pale man who's like so obviously a fucking vampire in a
that part is so hilarious. Like, he just walks right into this party, which is so lush. I mean, this scene is definitely one of those moments where you are so amazed at like the Hammer aesthetic and how they pulled off these incredible scenes and this production value on usually pretty small budgets, because it's so beautiful, this whole ball scene. And this guy just walks in wearing like what looks like a Party City Dracula Halloween costume. Like he could not be more obviously a vampire.
I know. And
nobody seems to notice him.
Yeah, no one notices him except the Countess, who obviously knows him, and he whispers something to her, and then she tells the general that a dear friend of hers is dying and asks if her daughter Marcilla can stay with him. And he says it would be his pleasure. The other thing about this that's a little weird is like General Spielsdorf seems to know the Countess, but like how would that be?
It's very weird, right? I mean, because everything is so mysterious in the novella. Like they encounter these individuals just by like chance on the road, but here they seem to be established as neighbors. Seems like they've just moved in. They've just taken up residence, because everyone's like, ooh, like we must learn to love thy neighbor, and
that makes sense
down the road. But it doesn't really make sense, because if they've purchased a property, they're certainly not going to stay there. So.
Yeah,
it's a little strange.
It's strange, but we suspend disbelief for this movie. So he says it would be his pleasure, right? So Marcilla and her heaving bosom walk out into the night, and that mysterious vampire man is about to ride away on his horse, and they make eye contact, and he smiles knowingly at her and bares his fangs, right? So if you didn't know before that these were all vampires, now you know.
Now you know. Now you know. I'm so curious, like, what your take is on the mysterious vampire dude. Like, why is he there? What is his purpose? I feel like I have so ignored him in my many viewings of this film,
because nothing
I know so many like feminist critics. I mean, the kind of feminist critic that already hates this film, right? Like, see him as a symbol of like the fact that like we've taken this radical novel and we've inserted like the vampire patriarch who's really the voyeur and who's really pulling all the strings and controlling Marcilla's desires. But I just like I'm not here for that reading.
I could see that. Like, I could see that as one of the readings, but I read it more as he's in service to these women. Like, he's just kind of there to like enact his role. He doesn't talk. Like, I see him as just there to facilitate their feeding. Which
I totally agree with that. Like, I think it's so interesting because I've read these readings that are just like, oh, he's there commanding her. And I'm like, commanding where? He does not have a voice.
I don't see it that way at all. I see it as like, he's a helper. He's sort of a lower rung in their hierarchy, like I said. But I could see the other reading as well. Like, I could make a case for that as well. But I don't know. I prefer to see it as more of just he's a helper. Like, he's sort of not a Renfield because he is a vampire, but like a servant. You know, and the Countess and Marcella are, you know, in charge. I see it more that way.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah, we're gonna just go with that. We're a lot of this movie is just like me projecting what I want onto it. Yeah, which I'm fine with.
And that's what I do. I'm like, I was like reading that and I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that guy. Like, he's not.
Who cares? Well, this
like, Ingrid Pitt is on the screen. Like, I'm not looking at this dude in the Bad Party City vampire costume. Like, who invited him?
Yeah, totally. I don't care really about any of the men in this movie. Like, Carl is sort of interesting, but the rest of the men, like, not. It's just not the point. Like, who watches this for that? And I think the other part about, like, a lot of the criticism of lesbian vampire films comes from like second wave critiques, film theory, like, or women who aren't gay, frankly, and don't see the inherent lesbian gaze in these films, and kind of they read it a different way than we do, because when we watch it, we're seeing our desires and our sexuality and our eroticism played out. And I think some critics watch this, and some women who aren't of that experience watch these films, and they can't see that because they're seeing the men who made it and like their stamp on it more so. Right. Whereas like when I watch it, I am sort of relating to it because at least when these men have their gaze on it, they have a more similar gaze to mine because they're seeing it with desire and eroticism. Like, as much as I would ever hate to relate to a man, there's more of that there because we also desire these women just like they do. So it's
totally.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. Also, it's like, I feel like these films offer a representation of high femininity that is gay, you know?
Totally.
Like, that is kind of difficult to find. And to see that is really exciting. Like,
it is really exciting. And like you were saying, Ingrid Pitt's like, she looks older. She's got this husky voice. And it's men attempting to show you that this is like a sexually inverted person. Like, this is an other, but unintentionally making it very gay. Like, it's their way of showing you that she's different from the other women, but in doing so, they create a dyke.
They do. And they like get it really right. And the energy is super right. Like, what she embodies obviously speaks to us so clearly and has to so many queer women who watch this film. Like,
especially femmes, because there is a lot of representation of femme lesbianism in film that is very much from a male gaze perspective, and like pretty much no representations of butch women in film. I mean, there was also the film The Killing of Sister George, which came out in 1968, which was also a British film, and that is about a butch lesbian. And it's very good if you can get a hold of it. If anybody could watch it, like, definitely recommend it. But there's lots of representations of femininity, but not a lot of representations of femness. So I think when we as femme dykes watch these things, we're sort of like, oh, I see that in myself. Like, it's different than just representing femininity. Like, femme is different than femininity. Right. And, you know, I see Ingrid Pitt in this as a femme dyke, like, very much so. And all of those coded things, like staring at the woman across the room and, you know, being ignored and doing that. And, like, sort of being able to move invisibly through straight society, but, like, not quite.
Not quite, right?
Yeah.
Like, only at the beginning.
Right.
Like, after that initial moment, I mean, we'll get to it probably when we talk about the later scenes, but you see that, like, initial attraction that the men feel fade away pretty quickly the longer they spend around her. And I mean, like, it's skipping ahead slightly, but just like that moment where Carl is talking to General Spielsdorf and they're like, she's become so devoted.
Oh my God.
And General Spielsdorf, like, Peter Cushing has this just dead, like, leaden face. And he's like, nevertheless, I shall be glad when the Countess comes back for her.
Yes, it's so good.
He's, like, so over her. But he doesn't say anything. Like, you can tell he can't, like, explain why. But he's become extremely uncomfortable around her. And of course, it's because she's a vampire, but it's also because she's a dyke.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing is, like, being a femme dyke is when you meet men, they're like, oh, this lipstick lesbian, like, that's so sexy. And then they realize you're just a man-hating dyke.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, to me, there's something that's, like, really relatable about, like, embodying this high femininity, but, like, in a way that makes men feel, like, extremely uncomfortable. And they're like, oh, this isn't for me. And I feel it. And, like, this energy feels really bad to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and, like, I just feel like that is so palpable in this film. And it's another reason why I love it so much.
Yes, it's so good. This next scene I also love when Marcilla and Laura are in the garden having a chat. So Marcilla can go out in the sunlight, notably, and she's in this beautiful blue dress. And she says she feels her and Laura will be such good friends. And she puts this flower crown on her and she tells her she's beautiful and she strokes her back. And it's so sexy. Like, how did they think this isn't gay?
Yeah, I mean, their faces are so close. She, like, pulls Laura's face so, and she's, like, stroking her hair, which again,
they're on a date.
And this moment too. Like, I know that you said that you feel like this film actually is really different from the novel, and I feel like it is too. But there are moments that feel so true, and this is one of them because you can feel Laura, like, be so kind of confused. Like, she's like, I feel the intensity of this, and I don't know how to process it. And so she says something like, oh, you're just teasing me, just like Carl does. And it's this moment where she compares that feeling to her only other experience of that feeling, which is with her fiance, beau, whatever, Carl. And that happens in the novella as well. Like, Laura's trying to process the intensity of the emotion between the two of them. And she's like, I don't know, like, there's just something so strange. Like, could Carmilla actually be a boy who's a suitor who has, like, snuck in masquerade? Like, which is an amazing moment in a super queer, like, moment in the novel.
That's so queer, yeah.
But it, like, speaks to, I mean, there's so many things you can do with that, right? Like, many, many things. But one of them is, like, the sense of, like, not being able to process an attraction that you've never been given a name for, right? And so, like, trying to process it through the only framework you have. And so I actually thought that's, like, a really genius moment of the screenplay where she's kind of like, is this like Carl? Is this like that? Because it feels like that.
Right. No, that's a really good point. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's when Marcilla is like, no, you're beautiful. Like, I'm not teasing you. I'm into you. That's also that very, like, kind of femme for femme moment that we always joke about, that of, like, you know, trying to, you know, oh my God, I love your makeup. Like, no, I love your makeup. Like, I'm flirting with you. Like, it's
we're just going to be such good friends.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That night, Marcilla stares out the window and she sees the vampire man again. And she knows, now is the time. Laura starts to have these bad dreams. She's tossing and turning. All of the bad dream sequences are shot in black and white, which is interesting. And she has this nightmare about a cat-like creature attacking her in her bed, which is true to the novel. And I love that it's a cat. Specifically, I feel like a lot of vampires, it's a wolf or a bat. Like I rarely hear about it being a cat. And that's just, I feel like the symbolism there is pretty obvious. Like, it's pussy.
She literally is being choked by a cat.
Exactly.
Like, I'm being smothered by this cat.
Exactly. Like, what could that mean?
I love that it's the cat too, because very few adaptations of Carmilla. Like, I'm actually not you probably know of others, but I can't actually think of another adaptation of Carmilla that includes the cat, at least not this prominently. And that was present in the novella, and that was, like you said, 26 years before Dracula, and so like the cat really like predates the prominence of like the bat imagery.
And the wolf imagery, because like Dracula, I think in the original novel also changes into kind of a wolf beast kind of creature to feed on Lucy. And the cat, I can't think of anything except for the most recent Carmilla, which is the most true adaptation. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But the cat, it's not a very common vampire creature. Like, it's just not what we usually associate with them. But I love that the lesbian vampire is the cat. Yeah.
I feel like I have to tell you that I do, in fact, have a black cat named Carmilla.
Oh my God, of course you do.
Which is a black cat. It's a black cat in the novel, and they make it a gray cat here, which
they do.
Is strange, except maybe, I'm like, did you only have access to,
I feel like somebody had a gray cat.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's so, of course you do.
I love the dream sequences. Like, I love the shadows. I love the way that we see the eyes, and the eyes turn into Carmilla's eyes. And I love I don't know how they achieve the effect or anything behind the making of it, but
the dream sequences are very they're very interesting. They're very like kind of experimental and just out of place in this otherwise very colorful film.
Yeah, it makes me think of Blood and Roses too, because we of course have like really amazing dream sequences in that film, like the super surrealist. Like, those scenes are just unbelievable, and they're obviously not that similar. But I do love that both of those films like pay so much attention to the dream as an important part of like the vampire seduction.
Yes, and
like the dream thing is just really, it's appealing to me, and I love that they really like mark off this moment by the black and white and like the way that they shoot it. Although there was a review, I think it was like the Monthly Film Bulletin, really criticized them for how bad the cat fur looks.
I didn't even notice.
There are moments that you see like cat fur kind of covering Laura's face or like attacking her, and it does not look really like a real cat. It just looks like bad faux fur fabric. And so this review said that it's nice that they did the whole cat thing. That was unique, but it happens to look a lot more like a moth-eaten rug.
Which, like, they didn't have a lot of money.
Exactly. I still am happy with it, but I just find that a hilarious read.
That is really funny. Yeah. So Laura wakes up screaming, and her father and nursemaid come in, not her father, her uncle, and nursemaid come and comfort her, and then they go check on Marcilla, who does not answer because she's not in there. We see this shot of her outside at night staring up at Laura's window. come on. And some time passes. Laura is sick and the general is bereft. He doesn't know how to help her. She has these nightmares all the time. She's fatigued. Some shitty doctor says that she's anemic. It's very much speaks to this way of women not being believed, I feel like, of, she's anemic. She just needs to eat more red meat and, she'll be fine. And even
get some blood in her.
Right. Even the general is like, she's legitimately sick. And this doctor is just like so inept. But it very much speaks to what you were saying of the men are just completely inept in this film. Like
they're completely inept.
Yeah, they have no idea what to do. Marcilla watches the doctor leave, smiling. She tends to Laura in her bed. Laura thanks her for taking care of her because she doesn't know what she'll do when Marcilla leaves, even though she doesn't know Marcilla is the one inflicting all of this on her, which I felt like, and I write about this, I don't know if you got a chance to read the essay that I wrote recently for Cultured magazine, but I wrote about codependency and in lesbian relationships and vampire films and lesbian vampire films. And this is a very prominent example of trauma bonding, right? Which is like somebody inflicting pain on you and then soothing it so that you associate them with the source of the pain, but also of the soothing of the pain, which is a very common thing in abusive codependent relationships. And I just found this something that is unintentionally quite profound in this film of, somebody who was like feeding off of you, but also the source of your comfort, which can be very common in gay relationships when you are you feel like you're clinging to this abusive person because you're also scared of being without someone else in this world, which is so homophobic.
Wow. Yeah. I can see that this film is a really excellent sort of case study for that exact argument. And like that, the kind of vulnerability from being afraid to leave that person, particularly again, it's like your first relationship, which of course we're seeing these young innocents be seduced by this sort of worldly feeling older lesbian. Yeah, like for sure.
Yeah. And it's Carmilla or Marcilla, Mercala, whatever, she also goes from relationship to relationship, like never quite getting what she wants out of it. And Marcilla kisses her softly on the lips and then on the neck, embracing her, and it's very sensual. And Carl comes to call on Laura, but her father says she won't see anyone but Marcilla. And this is that moment you were saying where the general is like disturbed by Marcilla and Laura's relationship, but does not know why he's disturbed by it. He just knows something is off. Laura continues to have nightmares that plague her. She gets sicker and sicker. She wastes away in bed dying, but begs for Marcilla. So she is addicted to her. The nurse goes to fetch Marcilla, but she's not in her room. And this is in some ways, like this has been read, like we were saying, by feminist scholars as a very parasitic representation of lesbianism. That's definitely, it's got that predatory lesbian trope going on, right? Of like the older woman who is corrupting the younger woman and making her feel all kinds of ways she wouldn't naturally feel. So that's definitely there, right? But it's also, I'm more interested in this as a representation of being addicted to that feeling for the first time of, being with this beautiful older woman. Marcilla appears in Laura's room and says she went to the chapel to pray for Laura, which is of course very funny because she can't go into a chapel. And
her delivery into is so epic.
What did you just say?
Sorry, her delivery of that line is so
Oh yeah,
sick.
she's like, I was in the chapel. Yeah.
Pray.
No one believes her. And she looks at Laura and just kind of matter-of-factly says she's dead. The doctor arrives to check on Laura bearing her breast, right? And he sees these 2 puncture marks on her breast. And Marcilla has mysteriously disappeared. And this is a great moment where the general calls her name and it echoes and it kind of fades into, we pan to see the gravestone that reads Mircalla Karnstein, 1522 to 1546.
Yeah, I love that. It's so amazing. Those shots are so beautiful. We get more of the fog again. We see it at the beginning.
Yes, and we learn that Marcilla is actually Mircalla, and she died in 1546, so she's been dead for quite some time. And
she died at 24.
Yes, yeah. And Carl tells the Mortons, so that's Emma from the beginning, right? Laura's friend, and her father, of Laura's death. And he says the general went to go stay with his friend Baron von Hartog, who's the guy from the beginning. And right. Emma sobs to her governess, Madame Perronneau, who is also very hot.
Wow. Can we have a moment for Madame Perronneau? Because she is very important.
Very important. I love her character. Another mommy figure. Like, I love her in Carmilla's relationship that they're going to have.
Yeah, she's just this ultimate lesbian governess figure. And there's this moment in Nina Auerbach's book, which, like, Nina Auerbach obviously, like, hates this film and, like, whatever. And the only thing that I like about her reading of this film is that she calls Madame Perronneau's character sinister because intellectual.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's the other part of it. Yeah.
That is the moment that is the only part of her reading of this film that I like. Because it's so spot on. It just really speaks to the fact that, like, she's also really coded as a dyke from the moment that you see her. And, like, it has to do with her sort of status as, like, single working woman installed in this family structure that she's not a part of.
Yes.
And, of course, sinister, suspect, not quite feminine in an appropriate way because she's an intellectual.
Yes, exactly. Which, I mean, you gotta love a spinster governess. Like, come on. That's, I mean, as somebody who, like, would have been that if I were alive.
Definitely.
Yeah. Like, I see you, girl. Yeah. We also get this scene of this terrified, buxom peasant girl, and she's carrying a basket through the woods, very Red Riding Hood style, and she hears these noises and she runs away, and we get this, like, POV shot of, where the thing's stalking her, and we see what looks to be Marcilla feeding on her. And I also thought this was an interesting, because this also happens in the novella, right? Of, Carmilla kind of going around and killing peasant girls. There's these class differences in her feeding rituals, right? Like, the peasant girls, she just kind of eats right away. And these rich girls, she feeds on them over time.
Yeah, it's so intense. I do love that the film brings that out because it's so prominent in the novel. It's like, she just, like, treats the village girls as really disposable, but she savors the aristocratic women, and it's like she's dating them. She's sort of like, I think we're supposed to have the sense that, like, she must know that she's killing her victims, but she seems really sad about it.
She does.
On some level. Even with some of, I mean, it depends on how you interpret the funeral scene later, but, like, even with some of the not aristocratic or those who are from a lower class position, but yeah, she just sort of devours them. in this way that's very fast, and these are just like her one night stands.
They're her one night stands, yeah. And like the older, the aristocratic girls, she's like courting them. It's a ritual, and that has to be seen through to the end. Mr. Morton comes upon this carriage accident in the woods, and this is a great scene. The unharmed passengers emerge, and it is the Countess and Marcilla, now saying that she is the Countess's niece and going by the name Carmilla. So the faked carriage accident, right? This is how the book actually begins. That's how Carmilla comes into Emma's life in the book, or Laura's life in the book. And Emma and her father say Carmilla is too shocked to continue the journey, and they insist that she stay with them.
Yeah.
Emma is very excited at the idea. The governess, Madame Perronneau, gives this German lesson in this one scene, and it's very hot. She's speaking German.
Oh, it's that scene. I feel like that scene is like where things like really just like take a wild turn, because that scene's really hot, and then it leads into like what is arguably the best scene. But yeah, when they're both trying to teach her how to say the German word for eyebrow, she's just like so doe-eyed and
so femme. Eyebrow.
Ingrid Pitt just being like, you have to say it right. You have to say it right. And she's like, German is so difficult.
Oh my God, it's so hot. It could easily devolve into full pornography, this scene. And I mean, Madame Perronneau and Carmilla are sort of linked together in this scene, right? As like being smart, being worldly, whereas Emma is just innocent. Emma walks in on Carmilla in the bath, and we get to see Ingrid Pitt's breasts, right? And Emma, right? Emma tries on Carmilla's dress, which is more sophisticated. And Carmilla encourages her to take off all her underwear because a bodice ruins the shape. And Carmilla watches Emma in the mirror. She watches her undress. How could you think that this was not gay? It's not computing.
This scene is so amazing. Like, the bathtub is so beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's this bathtub like in the middle of the room that has this beautiful curved shape to it. There's like this floral wallpaper. Everything is so lush and beautiful. She stands up soaking wet from the bath. Her skin is glistening. Ingrid Pitt, by the way, loves doing this nude scene.
She did. She's like, hey.
She was like, I'm very, very proud of my body. Like, why not? Which I just love.
I love that too. Yeah, because these films were accused of being exploitative, or, the actresses being taken advantage of. And she was asked about that in an interview, and she was like, I did not feel that way at all. Like, I love seeing this scene. Like, I look great.
Yeah, and like Madeline Smith too, like, she's talked about how she had a lot of apprehension about the nude scene, but she definitely didn't feel like, I don't think that she felt coerced or exploited. Like, what I've read is like she loved Roy Ward Baker, like thought that he was like so amazing and like very like fatherly, and like just did not feel like he was being like lecherous with her. So she felt like it was very like professional, and she said Ingrid Pitt's confidence really inspired her.
Wow, it doesn't sound gay at all, Madeline.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like she was really admiring Ingrid Pitt's confidence.
Right, exactly. So Carmilla and Emma wrestle playfully, and Carmilla...
They topless wrestle!
They topless wrestle, and Carmilla pins her to the bed and stares deeply into her eyes. And she dresses Emma for dinner in this bold dress that isn't as innocent as what she normally wears. And the father and Madame Poirot are very skeptical. And Carmilla wears her red dress again, which I feel like the red dress is also part of the ritual. Mm-hmm. Like, it has to be worn at a certain time, and is very ritualized, her killings, and like they all happen in the same trajectory. And it's kind of like she's living out something over and over again. It's very kind of, like like a ghost, which, you know, she is the dead. So she must live this cycle out over and over again.
I love that. And actually, like, I think that's true. You probably can track the cycle through her outfits, which is pretty amazing. I'm so obsessed with everything that she wears in this film, but I don't know that I really noted the progression. I know she wears like the like beautiful, iconic black sheer slip when Laura dies. And I think she starts wearing it again.
Yes.
Emma starts like taking a turn for the worse. But this moment where they come down after their like naked wrestling, where they come down to dinner, is like one of those like laugh out loud moments where you're like, how is this not like a Community in joke? Because they come out of the room having just like topless wrestled with Ingrid Pitt like pinning her. Romantic music swells right when that happens, and you get this like close up of Ingrid Pitt like looking very like kind of predatory,
yes,
and sultry. And then they just like they walk down with like these, I don't know, like she's got like she is smiling and she's like, oh yeah, we just did that. And like Madeline Smith is kind of like giving these furtive little like embarrassed glances.
Her innocence is gone.
She's kind of like, ooh. And it's like the sense of like, I don't know, like coming down to dinner after being like up in your room with like your first girlfriend, like coming down to your parents or something. Like it has that feel.
It definitely does.
Of like, oh wow, I was just like up in my room and now we have to come back down. Like her face is hilarious. Like Madeline Smith's expressions there just send me.
They're so good. And Ingrid Pitt's too. She's very like, what now? Too.
She's like, yeah, I did that.
Mr. Morton and Madame Perronneau. She's like, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, and you have like this slight sense that Madame Perronneau is a little bit like threatened, having been, you know, the big dyke in the household that was spending a lot of time with innocent young Emma.
Yes, she's a little threatened, and she's also more tuned in than anybody else because of that. So Carmilla, you know, she drinks red wine at dinner but is disgusted by it because it's this poor substitute for blood, of course. And that night, Emma suffers from the same dreams that Laura did. The dreams are again in black and white. Madame Perronneau comes to comfort her, but she insists it was just a nightmare. Emma gets sicker, right? So the same thing is happening. And Carmilla tells Mr. Morton, I will take care of her. Right. And he's very skeptical of that. And we also see that she never eats or drinks. So Mr. Morton asks Carl to come check on Emma while he's on a business trip in Vienna. And Madame Perronneau tells Emma to not get carried away with her imagination, right? You know, she's kind of like gaslighting her because something is obviously happening to her. And, you know, people are just dismissing her again, just like they did with Laura. That night, I love this scene. Carmilla becomes insanely jealous because Emma speaks of wanting a handsome man like Carl to come and marry her and take her away. And they have this basically a lover's quarrel.
They do. It's a lover's quarrel. It's their first fight and they do a lot of processing.
They do. You know, Emma says, you're so sensitive.
You're so sensitive.
And Carmilla is like, I just want you to love me forever. Like, all your life, only love me. It's this very crazy codependent fight. And she
I love too that
her love.
This fight, I love too that this fight starts because Carmilla is reading aloud to her. She's reading this book. And all we get is the final sentence that she read. And it's like, and he showered her with manly kisses. And then she closes the book and goes, this is a silly book.
Oh my God, me.
Like, Carmilla is just like, I'm not into this like heterosexual romance plot at all. And Emma's just like, but don't you wish you could meet a handsome young man? And she goes, no.
Yeah, she just straight up she says no.
So good.
It's so good. Yeah. And I love how she's just like, ugh. Anyway, back to us.
Back to us.
And she says, you know, Emma says, Carmilla tells Emma she loves her. She doesn't want anyone taking her away from her. And Emma says, but it wouldn't be the same thing. It's different. And I was like, oh, my gay heart. Like, you can see Carmilla, the hurt on her face when Emma says that. Like, she's just crushed. And she kisses Emma goodnight. And then she also kisses Madame Perronneau goodnight.
Oh, that moment too, because I mean, Madame Perronneau like interrupts when they're having this very intense like lovers quarrel, but they've just sort of made up, and Madame Perronneau interrupts, and all of a sudden Carmilla's just like, yep, everything's fine in here, like we weren't having like a really intense lesbian processing session over my like smothering demands for affection. And she just like turns on the charm with Madame Perronneau and says like, oh, you're so kind, and kisses her. And Madame Perronneau's face,
she's into it.
She's so into it. She is like blown away.
Yeah. I mean, she's been waiting for this all her life. Like, she's...
That is exactly what her expression says to me. And I love that there's no like dream seduction or like sense of...
No, she's just gay.
She's just gay.
Yeah.
She's literally just gay. And she's like, holy shit, this like hot woman has moved into my house where like I've had no one to be with. And she just kissed me. And I think she gave me the vibe.
Yeah, she gave me the look. Yeah, they clock each other. And which I love. Carmilla eats another peasant that night. And in the garden the next morning, this is also an interesting scene because Ingrid Pitt's acting is very good in this scene. She's agitated by this funeral procession for the peasant that she killed. And she gets very upset. And she, Emma says, isn't it so sad? And she says, you must die. Everybody must die. And Emma, kind of says like all of these young women have been dying in nearby villages, and she comforts Carmilla, and she says, she says to Carmilla like, I shouldn't have said that, like, I didn't realize how upset you would get. It's very gay. Like,
yeah.
What do you make of that? What do you make of Carmilla getting so upset? She also begs Emma to hold her. She's usually the one who's being, the girls are begging to be held by her. So it's a very different vibe for her in this scene.
Yeah, I love this scene. It's interesting. I don't know what to make of it. I think two things are going on, and there's a funeral scene in the book as well where she sort of loses it when a funeral procession goes by. So I think on the one hand they took this from the source material, but I think that it's both the fact that I think the religious music is supposed to be painful to her, like as a vampire, and it's weird that like she can be in the light, but in the scene she also seems to be experiencing sensitivity to the sun. At the beginning of the scene, she's like, Emma's like, well, come sit in the light. And she's like, it's too bright for me. It hurts my eyes. Right. So we're seeing like multiple vulnerabilities for her here. So I think part of it is the religious music is causing her some kind of like physical pain. But I also do read it as a sense of remorse. Like, I think, of course, we're supposed to believe that this is one of her victims, right? Who's being taken away. And I think that I do read it as remorse for her actions. We do have the sense of her, I think, as like a tragic figure. Like, she knows all of her victims are going to die, but she seems to believe, at least with the aristocratic ones, that like each one is going to be different. Like, this is going to be the one.
This one will be different. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think she's sad. I think she's overcome with guilt.
Yes, and it's also kind of plays into that idea of the vampire as a tortured figure, as somebody who doesn't delight in killing. It's it's a necessity, but it's a torturous thing. It's a curse, right? The immortality of you get the gift of immortality, but you have to feed on people forever, and you never really have a real connection. It's a being damned.
Yeah, and I think that's one reason why Ingrid Pitt is so amazing in this scene, because that was something that she really understood about the character. Like, she didn't think it was a gay thing, but she did think it was like a tortured, tragic thing. She saw the Carmilla character that she was playing as someone who just is so desperate for closeness and intimacy and touch, which she somehow didn't think of as gay, but okay. But that, she was doomed to never be able to have those things because she would destroy each person that she became close to. And I think, that is something that Ingrid Pitt understood about the character very well.
Definitely.
And you see it here.
Definitely. So Carmilla.
Oh, wait, what? Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just want to say one quick thing about the scene is why is Ingrid Pitt's hair so bad in the scene?
Oh my God, I didn't even notice.
It's pulled back in a ponytail inexplicably, like a nape of the neck ponytail, like she's just headed to the gym.
Oh, yeah.
And when you see it shot from the back, it is like a literal rubber band. So I just need to express my outrage because it's such a great scene. And then every single time I'm like, this hairstyling is femphobic. Like,
I know. I see that. That's really funny. I mean, yeah, her hair is so good in every other scene of the movie. Like her hair is just like lustrous in this film. But yeah, that's really funny. It's like, they were like, oh, we don't know. Put it in a ponytail.
I'm like, I tried to make a theory for her because her hair is actually, like you noted about the outfits, her hair is especially lustrous after her victims die. Like in that scene where Laura dies, her hair is like the most beautiful it's been in the whole film. It's like curled and like really big.
Well, that makes sense because she is weak in the sunlight in this scene, so she's, she needs to eat. It's almost also like as if the peasant women's blood doesn't really do much for her either. Like she needs rich blood. Like they're just snacks.
The girl has expensive taste.
She does, yeah. Respect. That night, Carmilla reads to Emma and she mysteriously leaves as if called by the moon itself. And Emma also tells her that she never gets tired at night. She's feeling excited at night. And then during the day, she feels awful. Carmilla also asks her if she dreams, and she seems to almost get off on Emma's pain here. She, is extracting details from her of this dream. I also love that Emma says she hasn't told anyone the specifics of her dream, but she tells Carmilla now that in her dream, there's a cat that sits at the foot of the bed and stares at her. And then the cat lies across her and then it turns into Carmilla. And all of a sudden she is so happy to see her. And then Carmilla embraces her and then kisses her. And suddenly everything is okay. But even as Carmilla holds her close, she feels pain, like sharp needles, and feels that the life is running out of her. What do you make of this dream?
I just love this moment. I think you already highlighted some moments where it feels very confessional. It's like, I'm telling you this thing that I've never told anyone else. And of course, the contents of the dream seem to admit her erotic attraction to Carmilla. And I think, there's just so much that's coded there, and the sense of like feeling excited and restless at night. Already become.
I definitely do.
It's so relatable. Like, oh, I feel restless and excited at night, and then I feel so wretched during the day. Like,
same,
sister. Like, same. But like, we have her like really naming explicitly like the experience of Carmilla's seduction, which we don't get quite from Laura. And it's something that I think the film gets really right. Like that, Carmilla appears and all of a sudden these girls are just like writhing in pain and ecstasy in their beds. Like
it's like a masturbation metaphor also.
Oh, definitely. For sure. It's Madeline Smith said that she didn't understand when she was filming these dream scenes that they were supposed to be masturbation or like orgasmic.
Right.
Scene.
I know Laura and Emma both play it like it's incredibly painful, but in the book, I imagine it is more like an orgasmic scream when they wake up as opposed to a painful scream.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can see it as both in the film too. Like it's pain and pleasure, right? Which is like true of vampire mythology, and it's that sense of like attraction and revulsion simultaneously. Like I see Laura's dream sounds as like pretty orgasmic, although it's almost like it's so overwhelming she's like it's like too much, right? Like at one point Laura says, "Oh, not again."
Yeah, right.
Another thing I love about this moment, and this is just awful, but Emma says that she can feel, like, part of the dream is that she can feel the fur in her mouth.
I mean, come on. Like,
I had to point it out.
You mean, like, it's really hitting you over the head with it there. Carmilla also kisses Emma and slowly undresses her, laying her down and kissing her all over. And Emma is like in a trance. You know, she's kind of in ecstasy. That night, in her sleep, Emma screams again, and Madame Perronneau and Carmilla come to comfort her and tuck her in. And I love this. Madame sees the bite marks on Emma, and Carmilla insists that it was this sharp brooch that made these marks. She says, "See, I have it here too." And then she pins the brooch to Madame, and Madame is immediately hypnotized by Carmilla. And Carmilla seduces the governess. She beckons her into her room, turns off the light, undresses her. We see this she undresses herself. We see this gorgeous silhouette of Ingrid Pitt's naked body, and then Madame goes to her, and we assume that they have sex.
Yeah, I love it so much. It's very good.
It's so good, and it's almost like Madame is hypnotized by her, like she's under her control in a vampiric way, but she's also always wanted this. Like, she can't control herself, and she doesn't want to. Like, she goes so completely to Carmilla. There's no seduction, there's no dream seduction, like you said. It's, you know, just it's more of like also an adult kind of relationship, whereas Carmilla and her victims are more kind of like a mommy girl thing, like an older woman, younger woman thing. And in this one, it's kind of like, no, we know what's up, girl. We've been eyeing each other, like, and it's straight up no pretense, no girlish pretense of like, we're kissing, we're in bed and we're snuggling, we're having a sleepover. It's like, no, we're having sex, adult sex.
Yeah, she literally just like tells Madame Perronneau, she beckons her into the room and just like strips in silhouette, and it's just like, you know, she just says turn off the light or whatever. It's very direct.
It's extremely hot and direct, yeah. So Carl comes to call the next day, and Madame Perronneau is no longer herself. She turns Carl away. She's been turned. You know, Carmilla she's got that vampire pussy. Like, Madame Perronneau, I am choosing to believe that she is not in fact hypnotized. She's just like, no, I have a girlfriend now.
Yeah, I feel like my argument for her not being hypnotized is like, she has a really awkward expression at the breakfast table the next morning. I don't know if you like, after they have sex, you see her the next morning and she's sitting really nervously at the table being like, oh my God. You can see her processing like, fuck, like this is my job, and
yes,
like, I have like potential, like, and
I felt the same thing.
There's such a clarity there to her processing. I think later she is more under, like, later there's evidence that she's been placed under Carmilla's spell in a way that is more like hypnotism and mind control. But like at this point, it still feels very much like this is simply about her attraction.
Yeah. And she, you know, she's now kind of in service to Carmilla. Like, she turns Carl away. She lies about Emma having a friend with her, right? Because Carl knows what, you know, he would know that she's going from house to house because he saw her at Laura's house. So she's hiding that there's somebody else there. She's kind of like more of a Renfield sort of character. She's femfield. And yes, that would be a really good drag persona, by the way. Femfield.
That really would be. That's amazing.
One of the then now that the father is gone, now that Mr. Morton is gone, Carmilla like controls the house. She's taken over. One of the male servants, Mr. Renton, says that he thinks Emma should see a doctor, but Madame dismisses him. She's like totally devoted to Carmilla and Carmilla's agenda now. Mr. Renton goes to the bar and he tells the barkeep about Emma. And he jokes about vampires and like everything stops. And the barkeep tells him of all the deaths of young girls in the village. And he is now concerned. And he goes to the doctor. This is like all stuff with men. So I'm just like, okay, anyway, let's move on. He goes to the doctor and he asks him to come see Emma. So in Emma's room, Carmilla appears. This is an interesting scene. Emma says she's dying and Carmilla says, yes, she is. And Emma says, well, I live until father comes home. And Carmilla says, perhaps. She's like thinking about it. Carmilla kind of vacillates between wanting her victims to live and become her consort and also like accepting that they must die so that she can keep feeding. The doctor arrives and Carmilla and Madame Perronneau are distressed and he insists on looking at Emma and he says she's close to death. So the rest of the film sort of becomes like the men vanquishing Carmilla. Mr. Renton like brings these garlic flowers into the room and the doctor scolds him, but then we see that was a ruse because he was just acting like that in front of Madame Perronneau so that she doesn't suspect that they're on to them. He puts this cross around Emma's neck. And then Madame and Mr. Renton start to like fight over the presence of the garlic in the room. And Mr. Renton is like a believer now and he brandishes the garlic at her and Madame like locks herself in her room. So she's like not exactly a vampire, but she's kind of a Renfield, right? Like she's under the vampire's spell. She also can't be around garlic. She can't be around crucifixes. Carmilla enters Emma's room, but she's repulsed by the flowers and the crucifix. Yeah. So Carmilla descends on the doctor as he's leaving, riding through the woods, and she bares her fangs. So we see her fangs for the first time. And she kills the doctor very swiftly.
Love it. We love to see it.
We love to see it. He like tries to fight her off. He like draws a cross in the dirt, right? But Carmilla's like, no, and kills him.
I was gonna say I love that he draws the cross and it's
useless. Yeah. Mr. Morton returns and he is all skeptical of the anti-vampire treatments, but they bring the barkeep from the village and he tells him about the vampires, and he also tells the story that we saw from the beginning of the Baron Hartog who killed the Karnstein vampires. And Mr. Morton flees on horseback to fetch the doctor who's not shown up. Carmilla asks the servant Gretchen to remove the garlic flowers so she can see Emma, right? But they keep trying to get the garlic out of the room, but they're not removing it.
Poor Gretchen.
Poor Gretchen, right?
This chunk of the movie, I swear to God, like the parts with Gretchen just feel like they go on forever. Like the fight about the garlic flowers definitely could have like been less prominent.
I'm like, come on, guys. I know it's like over and over again. Like, all right. Yeah. I sort of like my notes. You can even tell I'm just like not as interested in this part of the movie because my notes are just like rushing through. Like, okay, we're done with the sexy stuff, so I don't care as much anymore.
Yeah, there are still great moments and like the big climax scenes like at the end, but yeah, this chunk of the movie with the garlic flowers is where things really start to lag because there are like too many men in this part of the film. There's just
too many men, exactly. Mr. Morton runs into Carl and General Spielsdorf with Hartog in tow, Hartog from the beginning in the woods, and they show him the doctor's body. So Hartog, and because he's, been killed by Carmilla, and Hartog and the generals scoop Morton, and they tell him of their plans to head to the Karnstein castle and destroy the vampires there. So at the castle, this is when Hartog says he was determined to avenge his sister's death and rid the world of the Karnstein vampires. He retells everything from the beginning of the film. The men are shocked that the vampire was a beautiful woman, which was interesting. I think they expected to be like this horrible monster. And that's when they're like, a beautiful woman, you say?
This part is so funny because Morton finally puts it together. It's like everything has been right in front of him, and he saw the doctor dead, and he just took a presumably long carriage ride with them where they were filling him in on the details. But apparently it's not until this moment when they arrive and they see the portrait. And he's like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that woman is a guest in my house.
Yeah. So they also see this portrait, of Mircalla, right, who they recognize as Marcilla/Carmilla. And back at the house, Renton is entranced by Carmilla. She bites his ear, she strokes his neck. She's doing what she's gotta do, right? But you can tell she's not interested because they kiss passionately, and Carmilla opens her eyes bored while she's kissing him. It's really a means to an end.
I really that's one thing I love about the film, right? Because they maintain her interest in women here. This isn't a moment that feels particularly exciting for the male gaze either.
No.
He's foolish and he thinks that he's lucky. And she's so clearly not into it and so clearly going to kill him without any pleasure being involved from the erotic encounter. And I really appreciate the way that scene is done.
Totally. And Renton also is an idiot and thinks Madame Perronneau is the vampire. Right? Because she's a learned
because she's
woman.
So sinister.
Yeah, exactly. She's sinister. She's single. So Hartog, back at the castle, right, they see that portrait, and that mysterious vampire party city guy laughs in the distance. And Renton, now possessed by Carmilla, demands that Gretchen remove the cross from Emma's neck and that the garlic be removed. Poor Gretchen. She's so confused. They keep confusing her with this fucking garlic and the crucifixes. And Renton and Carmilla make out again and she kills him. Yeah. Good. I was like, kill him already. I hate this guy. Carmilla absconds with Emma. This is another one of my favorite scenes because Madame Perronneau begs her to take her with them, and she cannot live without Carmilla. It's so sad. It's she's watching her lover choose this other girl over her.
This is so sad. It's so awkward. It's oh wow, you really you really did not communicate your boundaries between these relationships clearly. Carmilla made everything a mess. It's those moments where vampire movies are about bad Polly,
It's true. It's just a it's bad Polly. Carmilla takes, and she looks so tortured too, Madame Perronneau. She's so good in this scene. And Carmilla takes her in her arms and kills her by feeding on her. And Emma sees and screams in horror, and she passes out from being so weak. This is when Carl bursts in to save the day, and him and Mircalla struggle, but he overpowers her using his dagger as a cross and warding her off. And Mircalla sort of apparates, she just fades, she disappears.
I love the moment where she disappears so much. It's such an incredible moment, and I really want there to be a gif of that because that is such a mood. You know what I mean?
Mood,
it's anytime a man is talking to me ever, I just want to dissolve.
Yes,
the way that she does. It reminds me of the meme of Homer Simpson backing into the shrubbery.
It's so good.
It's very that. Also that scene where she kills Madame Perronneau and they make out for a moment and they have this last erotic moment. Apparently on set, her Ingrid Pitt's fangs kept
Oh, right.
falling out. Like,
yes, into her
would not
into
stick
her
in.
cleavage.
They kept
Yeah.
falling right. Yeah, I just think that's such a funny moment. To think
Yes,
about.
and she put them in with chewing gum so that they would stay during that scene. Yeah. So there's like, I love when she disappears. It got that nice cheesy cross dissolve, and Mircalla returns back to the Karnstein castle, but the group of old men are waiting there for her. And my note here is just boo.
Yeah, yeah,
Hate it.
hate it.
Right. Mircalla returns to her coffin and she looks so gorgeous asleep in this coffin. It's such a look.
That was in my notes as well.
Yeah.
Like, I have in my notes, in the coffin, this is like the most gorgeous she's looked. This is when her eyeliner is the most on point in
Yes.
the entire film.
It's so good. And General Spielsdorf avenges Laura by staking Mircalla through the heart. And Emma can sort of feel it happening, like, because she's psychically connected to Mircalla, and she screams as Mircalla is staked. And when I first saw this movie, I thought Emma was going to die with her.
Yeah.
But she
I did
doesn't.
too.
Yeah, she's just released from the spell. And just to be sure, the general decapitates Mircalla, and Emma is released from her spell, and she looks healthy already. Her and Carl gaze into each other's eyes, and barf, heterosexuality wins again.
It's just like, you are really bad friends. Like, that was your only friend's fiance.
Right, girl. I know. And he sucks too. Like, he goes from one to the other. And we see the portrait of Mircalla. This is a good moment where the portrait kind of it withers and fades from being a beautiful woman to being a hideous skeleton. And it's very Dorian Gray style, very Victorian. And that is The Vampire Lovers.
I love that moment at the end with the portrait when it fades into the skull with the fangs. And I think that, like, I really try to, like, you know, read this as positively as I can, like, for the vampires. And I like to think that, like, maybe we can believe that the scream that she utters isn't maybe the spell being broken. Like, who knows? We don't know, right? Like, we don't see it. The end of the novel is so ambiguous.
It
right?
is.
Like, we have a sense that Laura is free, but she doesn't ever really forget about Carmilla. And she, you know, the last line is about, like, hearing the footsteps, which gives us this sense of her presence. I actually kind of like that we end on the image from the portrait, because there is, like, this enduring sense of, like, the fangs, right? Like, we end with the fangs. And
the fangs are a really nice touch.
And with that heavy frame narrative at the beginning with Baron Hartog, I love how there's, like, all this attention to him, like, I'm telling the story, right? Now I am closing the book. This is
Right.
what I have written. It's my account, right? And I think that, like, so many feminist critics who don't like this film read that as, like, look, we see right from the beginning, this is the patriarchal, like, version of the story, right? Like, this is, like, the women's voices are silenced, and it's not like Laura telling her first person account. But I actually think that the frame narrative, like, draws attention to their very construction of the story. Because as we find out by the end of the film, his version was wrong.
Yes.
He writes this version where he's like, and I was the hero and I vanquished all the vampires. Well, obviously fucking not, bro, because otherwise this movie wouldn't be happening.
Right. No, I mean, that's true. I mean, it could be read as very ambiguous, like, who's to say, you know, that maybe Emma is not, the spell is not broken. Maybe Carmilla's soul has gone into her body, you know, and maybe they are one now in that way. Like, who knows, right?
Yeah. I mean, that would be much more like Daughters of Darkness or
Right.
like The Hunger, right? Which,
Yeah.
you know, I would love for it to be a little bit more clear, but I do think at least with the frame narrative, like, I think it only points out how, like, inept the men are. Like, I don't feel like it's their story. I feel like we're conscious of how much they want to tell the story, where they are heroes. But if you watch the film, they are not heroes. Even if they kill Ingrid Pitt, they are certainly not, like, the amazing heroes that his narrative tries to
No, they're
make
kind
them
of
out to be.
bumbling too. And, like, they're the way that they're just kind of like a group of annoying old men is very much highlighted when they're at the castle, like waiting for her. You know, it's not like a heroic kind of sexy men narrative. It's just like these weird old guys with a vendetta.
They're very bumbling, like, and it feels very intentional that we would see them in that way. Like, they don't feel particularly, like, I don't know, virile or powerful.
No, not at all. Well, this was so great. I'm so happy we got to talk about this. Where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on Instagram at Miss Malice _switch and play, which is the amazing collective that I'm a part of. And you can find me on Twitter at Miss Malice SNP.
Amazing. And you know where to find me. Girls Guts Giallo, Twitter and Instagram, patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. And I'll see you all next week.